Do you see that India can also benefit from the situation by attracting more companies that we want to allocate here the workforce in the future?
Yeah, I think so. I think, look, I mean, the trade war to me, straying away from obviously the political sensitivity of all this stuff, is something that I think is temporary. I think, and it's too early to call out sort of what the negative benefits of the negative elements of this might be. But India definitely stands as a beneficiary, and I think it works in a couple of different ways.
Ritik, thank you very much for being here today. We're gonna have a masterclass on the office market here in India. But before that, can you share a little bit more with our audience about Embassy REIT, please?
Sure, but first of all, Gustavo, thank you so much for having me. Thrilled to be
Pleasure.
a part of the GRI family and doing this program. We at Embassy REIT have been listed for 6 years now. We listed in 2019. We're backed by the Embassy Group, who remains a sponsor, along with Blackstone. We're the first REIT to list in India. We're the largest REIT in Asia by area, and we built up a tremendous office powerhouse that has sort of foundationally set the stage for commercial in India. And I'll get into the details in a minute. We run a 50 million square feet portfolio. We are built like most REITs around the planet. We are income producing business. We pay out 90% of our cash flows to investors in the form of dividends. We call it distributions. We actually pay out 100%. And we are structured very to protect the interest of shareholders. We make sure that we run a very, very strong business that's pan-India. We're anchored in Bangalore, India's largest office market. We are also in Mumbai, Pune, Chennai, and Noida.
While we see not as much as we saw a couple of years ago, but we saw a lot of stress in the office market in Europe and in the US. When we look at what's going on here in India, the situation is very different, right? The occupancy rates, the price of that you guys can achieve in per square meter, it's quite interesting. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, sure. And I couldn't agree more. I think what you saw back in the early part of this decade was clearly something inflicted by the onslaught of the pandemic, which we weren't immune to either. But fundamentally, what we've always noticed is that the office market has been heavily dependent on leverage. And I think when rates escalated back in 2001, 2002, a lot of people in the West, most landlords, most funds who were basically financing on free money were caught on the back foot. So when your rates go from effectively 1% financing to 4%, that's a 4x increase. In India, by contrast, we've always sort of had elevated rates, but at the same time, we've also had very prudent capital management. So at the REIT, for example, even through a pandemic, we were able to raise money very cautiously from a lot of investors because the fundamentals of this business here were very unlike those out west. This is a market where the rents aren't really a value destroying proposition for tenants who don't have to give up the keys and walk away because they can't afford it because of the pandemic. India still remains very cheap. And we were able to capitalize on that. We were able to capture all our rents, 100% of our rents, because the economics and the dynamics of this country for the world's best company are simply too good to pass up. So while we did face stress, while India obviously wasn't immune to any of the pressures, I think overall India emerged out of the entire real estate quagmire that still affects the West. I think if you just think about
I agree.
the economic dynamics of return to office, rates are still elevated. That sort of distress we just didn't see happening in India. And I think what happened, what really you can see that's still playing out. You can see that playing out in Resi. The developers have done a great job. In fact, I mean, way better than probably the REITs have when you think about sort of where their stock prices are. But at the same time, the fundamentals of our business have never been stronger coming out of sort of the early part of this decade. And I really think that we're in the middle of an early cycle.
So, if during COVID, the working from home was a huge phenomenon everywhere, here, as soon as COVID got a little bit under control, we could see that that wouldn't be such a strong phenomenon like it was in the US or in Europe. The GCC is a popular terminology here to describe something that looks like a very strong phenomenon that the trade war might increase even further for India. Would you agree that India can be one of the winners? I don't believe there are many winners in this trade war between
Right.
China, the US, or the US against the rest of the world, let's put it this way. But do you see that India can also benefit from the situation by attracting more companies that we want to allocate here the workforce in the future?
Yeah, I think so. I think, look, I mean, the trade war to me, straying away from obviously the political sensitivity of all this stuff, is something that I think is temporary. I think, and it's too early to call out sort of what the negative benefits of the negative elements of this might be. But India definitely stands as a beneficiary, and I think it works in a couple of different ways. Number one, just the economics of doing business in India with cheap rents, great office supply, great talent to hire, and the ability of a rule of law that continues to sort of attract capital. So yes, and we see that in our own business. We've got the world's best companies from the U.S., from Europe, from Asia, across an entire spectrum of sectors and industries, whether it's Novo Nordisk, the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, and I'll even stay away from talking about American companies. That's the kinds of companies that we're seeing. Novo Nordisk, the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, you're looking at sort of, British companies, very, very, strong, robust international tenant base that continues to see India as an attractive destination for hiring, as well as just the overall sort of capabilities. I think we do have a long ways to go. I don't want to oversell that entire story beyond what I think we see on the ground. But I think the fundamentals now heading into the latter part of this decade and beyond seem very compelling to me.
Now, for someone sitting at home or watching on the phone this interview, we are sitting here in Bangalore, the
Yes.
largest office market in the world, right? You guys have assets here, also in Mumbai, Delhi, Pune, and other markets.
And China.
Can you give an overview? If let's imagine that somebody doesn't know anything about office market in India,
Right.
a quick overview about the market, please.
Happy to do that. So India, effectively, if you think about it, is roughly an 800 million square feet office market. Now, not all of it is created equal. You're looking at effectively, call it the top sort of 6 cities count for the majority of supply. So the markets that you just mentioned, and then you tap in probably Hyderabad, Chennai, and Gurgaon, where we're not in that. We're in sort of the sister market. They account for most of the supply. The overview of that is Bangalore, India's largest office market. We have 25 million square feet of our own here. We're anchored in Bangalore. We think that's a strategic weapon. And then you've got Bombay, the financial capital, where we have a presence in a couple of iconic properties. Chennai is a very fast growing market for us as well. A lot of global companies, particularly financial services, are hiring over there. And I think these are the kinds of cities where they exist, and the office market tends to be concentrated simply because that's where most of the migration happens. The great schools, great hiring hotbeds. If you look, we run parks that are 100,000 people strong. 100,000 people work on sort of a 15 million square feet
Wow.
campus. That is bigger than Canary Wharf. Right, as if you think about sort of where an entire footprint of London is, we have one park in Bangalore that is bigger than that.
Wow.
Right, and it's a hotbed for hiring. It's an entire city and a community unto itself. And I think that's the attractiveness of why office space in India continues to be so compelling for global companies, and particularly office spaces like Embassies, what we've been able to do, and put up sort of these foundational platforms for companies to come and hire. So yeah, it's a fragmented office space in a lot of ways, but the concentration of quality rests with very few landlords like us, where we have pricing power, we have the power to attract tenants, and we make sure that we are always talking about whether it's GCCs or the world's best companies that are willing to pay these rents that are still a fifth of those that we see overseas.
Now, we know real estate's all about cycle and finding a right spot to enter and to leave the cycle. Are we close to the peak of the office market here, or we still have a long way to go?
So when I think about the cycle, I would have probably said that if the pandemic hadn't happened, we would have probably been a little further along sort of in it. But I think the pandemic, we lost probably a year and a half to COVID, at least. Even then, I think Embassy REIT did a great job. I think the entire sector was poised to come out of it strong. Last year was the best year we had for absorption in office. That was 80 million square feet growth, 84 million square feet gross. We're on track to match that or surpass that this year. And I think given that there is the dynamics around, as you were talking about, sort of why India remains compelling regardless of tariff wars, I think this is early cycle. And I think this still has room to run. It has room to run pan India. And I think, judging by the velocity of conversations we're having around GCCs, whether we're having this around other sectors, I think this is certainly early cycle for us.
Ritwik, final question.
Sure.
Why India? We have global investors looking to different markets. If you had to give a good reason why they should catch a plane and travel to India to understand what's going on here and to allocate part of their capital here in the country, why should they do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, rather than sound, trite about it, I just think about just the opportunity set from the quality of the workforce and the age of the workforce, right? You're sitting in a place where a lot of them are first generation going to college, getting opportunities as companies like JP Morgan, like, Novo Nordisk, or all these big companies that are, our biggest tenants, a $750 billion company. $3 trillion companies are in India hiring to run their global systems out of here. This is where there is so much happening. It's a healthy capital markets. There's a fundamental rule of law it's open for investment. There's, it's the credit ratings are sound. The ability to sort of work here and get rewarded for that, and effectively the returns that you can actually generate here are something that I think compare with any place in the world. So I think it's a very vibrant economy that continues to sort of provide in front of infrastructure. And I think the institutionalization of that, if you think about real estate, right? 6 years ago, there wasn't a REIT in this country.
True.
The very fact that we can put an asset class together, it has obviously hasn't been without its sort of, stops and starts. But then again, it was unimaginable that we could have done this. And given the reputation of a sector like real estate and what's happened to it in the past, there is no better place to think about generating an outside return relative to sort of the risk profile than India at this point in time. Given it is actually very stable. There is obviously the opportunity to manufacture, there's opportunity for services, there's opportunity for technology. So I would say get on that plane and come here.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.